year was 1933. Citizens across America were hoping for an end to the Great Depression and looked to their newly elected president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, to lead the way in the land of opportunity. Gas cost 18 cents a gallon. Monopoly had just been invented by an unemployed salesman from Germantown, Pennsylvania. And 4-year-old Shirley Temple was all the rage in films and radio across the country. Everyone's image of the perfect little girl living the perfect life. Meanwhile, that same year, over 3,700 miles away in Europe, in a town called Antwerp, located in Belgium, a daughter, Bertha, was born to Dora and Asher Teitelbaum on January 10th. Her Hebrew name was Bracha, which means a blessing, and she certainly was to her proud family. She is also my mother. I'm here to share her story with you. My mother was born into a Hasidic or religious family with a distinguished background, and the entire family doted on this special bracha, this blessing that came into their lives. Life was good for the Teitelbaum family. My mother's father was working as a successful diamond cutter in Antwerp. My mother had vivid memories of walking with her father hand in hand on Friday nights to the local synagogue. Asher Teitelbaum had a beautiful voice and was a cantor in the synagogue. His daughter was proud to be by his side and listen to him pray on behalf of the congregation. As time passed, the Teitelbaum family continued to grow. They were blessed with 2 more daughters, my aunts Malka in 1936 and Bella in 1937. But soon, as Hitler and his regime grew in strength and power, everything began to change. As my mother recalls in her memoirs, we had a radio, and I could tell the news worried my parents. But they didn't talk about political events in front of us, so I didn't know what was happening. I could sense the tension, though, and I knew my mother was very worried about her own parents living in Germany. My family managed as best as we could because, as Jews, when we went into the streets of Antwerp, we felt we were being watched and were unwelcome in the non-Jewish community. Their world was changing, and quickly. On November 9, 1938, anti-Semitism reached a new level of evil, going from harassment to violence with Kristallnacht, otherwise known as the Night of Broken Glass, decimating the Jewish communities in Germany and Austria. This is also known as Pogromnacht, a violent riot aimed at massacring Jews. Synagogues were torched, Jewish homes, schools, and businesses vandalized, and close to 100 Jews were killed that night. All Jewish businesses were marked with signs stating, "Do not buy from Jews," forcing Jewish businesses to close. In the immediate aftermath of Kristallnacht, some 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to Nazi concentration camps. Back in Antwerp, my mother, who was 7 years old, woke up one day ready to go to school as usual, but could see things were changing drastically before her eyes. The adults were rushing around the apartment, frantically throwing all of their personal belongings into suitcases. No time for explanations. Just like that, they must leave. Every Jew had to escape while they could before they were trapped under the murderous German invading regime. My mother and her family lived near the train station, and along with throngs of other Jews, hoped to board a train to France. She recalls in her memoirs, "Father found a train going to southern France, pointed it out and shouted to us to get on it. He didn't have tickets, so he picked each of us up, shoving my sisters and me onto the train through open windows. Everyone crowded and pushed to get on the train. It was unbelievable. Everyone was thinking the same thing, to escape the invading Germans, and only those who could get away quickly had a chance to be saved. For 8 days they traveled on that train with the Germans continuously bombing from above. There was no water, no sanitation. Occasionally stopping, they were able to use the bathrooms in the stations and were able to purchase water. Finally, the train arrived in a small town in France by the name of Villemur. Only half the people who started the journey remained on board. They were all met by the Red Cross. They were able to sleep in a gymnasium on cots, eventually being assigned a small 2-bedroom apartment, but with no running water. Somehow the family managed, but they knew they couldn't hide forever. They would be discovered. There was a demarcation in France between the northern and southern regions. Villemur was located in what was known as the Free Zone in the south of France that was controlled by the Vichy government, not yet occupied by Hitler's regime. They were Jews, and France was quickly falling under German occupation. When that day occurred, the Teitelbaum family was transported to Brens internment camp, located in southern France. The Brens camp was created in 1939 when 20 barracks were built to house a welcome center for refugees. But in the summer of 1940, the camp was emptied to make way for an accommodation center for foreign Jewish refugees. For many of these people, Brens served only as a stopping point on the way to death at Auschwitz concentration camp. When they arrived, my mother and her family were all very cold, very hungry, and their health was deteriorating quickly. After 3 months in Brens, 4-year-old Bella contracted diphtheria. Ironically, her illness turned out to be a blessing. Those running the camp feared an epidemic and evacuated everyone but the Teitelbaum family, who stayed by Bella's side through the entire ordeal, and others who were ill. Those transported were eventually sent to Auschwitz and to their deaths. By sheer determination and bravery, Asher Teitelbaum was able to obtain false documents for his family, and a nighttime escape was planned. My mother writes, "Once it got dark, the guards were not very careful, and one night, my parents, grandparents, sisters, and I snuck through an opening in the camp fence. There was no moonlight that night, so we held hands to make sure we stayed together as we tumbled up and down the hills. We headed towards the train station, which wasn't very far, and hid behind the station building until the next train arrived. Then we all jumped in. Eventually, the family arrived at a small French village, Orguiel, where they were told Jews were being hidden. However, my mother's grandparents were not so lucky. They were separated. It was too dangerous for the family to remain together any longer. They ended up living in a different internment camp for 1 year called St. Sulpice. Years later, the family discovered that they were sent to Auschwitz on transport number 30 on September 9, 1942. They did not survive. As for my mother's sisters and parents, they all survived in the Free Zone in the south of France in a chateau of a priest in the town of Orguiel, until the rules began to change and harboring Jews became even more dangerous. While most Frenchmen did not care about the deportation of Jews, the local bishop of the town of Montauban issued a letter condemning it. He requested that this letter be read at all the churches under his authority. He wrote, "I add my voice to the outraged protest of Christian conscience, and I proclaim that all mankind, Aryans or not, are brethren because they are created by the same God, and that all mankind, whatever their race or religion, has the right to be respected by individuals and by nations. The present anti-Semitism measures are an affront to human dignity, a violation of the most sacred rights of the individual and the family. Pierre-Marie Théas, Bishop of Montauban." A woman in the French resistance, Marie-Rose Geneste, knew this letter needed to be hand-delivered for fear of confiscation. So she volunteered to hand-deliver the letter to all priests within 100 kilometers, except to those who were known to be pro-Nazi. The bicycle she used to deliver the letters is on display in Jerusalem at the Yad Vashem Holocaust Museum. By 1942, a new German rule was being enforced, ordering widespread arrests of Jews across France. While living in the chateau in Orguiel, my grandfather, Asher, was arrested and taken to the Drancy internment camp. Then, on August 25, 1942, he was deported on Transport 25 from Drancy to Auschwitz. He did not survive. The Nazis then came back to arrest the women and children. My grandmother, Dora, made the painstaking decision to send both my mother, who was 9, and her sister Malka, who was 6, away from her to find safety. Bella remained with her mother. They eventually ended up at the chateau of Rabbi Zalman Schneerson.
My mother packed a little suitcase for Malka and I and gave us a one-way ticket on a bus and took us to the bus stop and told us to go to Montauban and go to the same place where we went a year before. When I arrived to the train station and got off with my sister and tried to find the place where I had to remember where it was a year before, the door was closed and there was nobody there to meet us. So I stood in front of the building with Malka and I started to cry. And a man passes by and he asked me, "What is my name?" And I said, "My name is Bertha Teitelbaum." Actually, I had a false name, but I thought that he would know my false name. And he said to me, I'm looking for you. You should come with me. But as I was very suspicious, because my past experiences, I didn't know to trust him, to go with him. Where is he going to take me? I didn't know that I'm supposed to go to Marseille. I just knew that he's going to bring me somewhere. So I didn't have any options. I couldn't go back to my mother because she gave me a one-way ticket on the bus. So I went with him. And my sister and I went on the train to Marseille, which was an overnight train. By the time we arrived to Marseille in the morning, the French gendarmes were checking papers, documents. And this man, who I don't know his name, and I don't remember what he looked like even, gave the documents to the policeman, and they asked me, "Who is this man?" And I said, "He's my father." I knew already I had to lie. And he said, "You don't have the same name." And so he arrested him, and the policeman took us to a hotel in Marseille. In Marseille, the hotels, they had arrested the Jews in hotels. 3 hotels were there in Marseille. One of them was the one that we were on, and he left us there. There were many people there, but and we had bunk beds, and we were the youngest children there. We never met Schneerson, and so I had no idea what will happen to us. And of course, the way we were treated, we didn't wash, we had food that they were thrown on the table, and whoever didn't get it on time didn't have any food. So we were there for about 2 weeks or longer, and then all of a sudden they said, "The Teitelbaum, where are the Teitelbaum sisters?" And so I looked up and I saw that 2 yeshiva boys were there, and they came to pick us up. I have no idea how Schneerson knew that we were in that hotel. But anyway, he found us, and the yeshiva boys took us to Rabbi Schneerson in a place in a chateau called La Vieille Chapelle, and this is where we met the first time Rabbi Schneerson. My sister Bella couldn't join us because she was sick. So she stayed with my mother, and a month later, another from the French resistance they were helping to transport Jews from one place to another with full documents. So my younger sister, Bella, came and she joined us. This is how we met Rabbi Schneerson. Rabbi Schneerson was a special person. Many people sent their children to the southern Brens, to the Vichy government, because supposedly it was a safe place for the Jews because it was not under the German police. We thought we are safe, but actually we were not. The yeshiva boys had to hide behind the chateau in the woods. And sometimes we had to bring them food because we never knew when they came. So we had guards watching how the police car came to us, and we knew already what to do. And this is how we lived until we had to move away from Marseille to another hiding place in Villemur. I will say this, that Rabbi Schneerson was also in touch with many of the people that were in the different camps. In France alone, there were 26 camps, like the one that my father was there. And that means that the French were also arresting the Jews and putting them into camps. They were labor camps. They were not camps like Auschwitz. It came Pesach, and Rabbi Schneerson was in touch with quite a few of these camps, and they asked him, they'd send him letters and requested all kind if it was helping with medication. And then came Pesach, and it is just wonderful that we're interviewing today before Pesach, because what Rabbi Schneerson did after he got a letter from a rabbi in a camp telling him that Pesach is coming and that he never ate the chametz. That will be the first time that he doesn't have matzah. And so what Rabbi Schneerson did, he ordered someone to build an oven, and we children were making the matzah and baking it and sending it to these camps. This is what Rabbi Schneerson did as far as helping as much as he could to the children and also in contact with the people in the different camps.
When it became too dangerous to stay at even this chateau, they eventually were all smuggled into Switzerland under the most dangerous of conditions. 2 days after crossing into Switzerland, the borders were closed. Thousands of refugees were immediately sent back. Though Switzerland opened its borders to some 25,000 Jews fleeing the Holocaust, it closed its gates entirely on another 30,000. The rejected Jews were sent directly by train to concentration camps, but the Teitelbaum women found refuge in Switzerland.
When we arrived, we were lucky that they agreed to let us in. On the train station in Geneva, where they took us to go to a camp, to different camps, about 3 different camps, until they decided where we could stay in Switzerland. I saw hundreds and hundreds of people standing on the train station in Geneva, being sent back by train. Jewish people standing there in Switzerland and being sent back to the camps in France. And I'm sure it was Auschwitz. So this is what it was as far as the Swiss letting the Jews in to Switzerland. We had to be separated. My mother and my younger sister went to a hotel, a ski resort, way up in the mountain. This is where they use the resort hotels. It was like an internment camp. They were not allowed to go out from the camp unless they got permission. It was a French part of Switzerland, because Switzerland has 3 different languages. Malka and me, we went to Institute Asher, which was an Orthodox school, and we stayed there for about 2 years.
On May 8, 1945, the church bells rang throughout the country announcing the war was officially over. Swiss post-war immigration policies were set in place that disallowed refugees from staying in the country. Though the war was over, anti-Semitism was still rampant and the government knew tensions were high, especially for those still occupying Jewish-owned businesses and houses throughout Europe. The Swiss were determined to get the Jews out of the country.
In 1945, when the war was over, my mother came and the Swiss ordered all the refugees within half a year to leave Switzerland. So we had to decide where to go. We decided, my mother came to me and she said, where should we go? And I said, Europe doesn't want the Jews. And so we had to decide, do we want to go back to Antwerp and maybe we'll meet our father, or we'll go to Palestine. This is where my mother had 2 brothers and a sister.
The decision was made by my mother and her family to go to Palestine, the future state of Israel, the Jewish homeland. On September 5, 1945, my mother, her 2 sisters, and my grandmother boarded the ship called Mataroa. It was overcrowded with Holocaust survivors that included many children who survived the concentration camps. It was time for another new life for a family that had suffered great loss. On May 18, 1948, Israel was declared an independent state, but the Arab countries surrounding Israel would have no part of it, and thus began the War of Independence. By 1950, on her 18th birthday, my mother enlisted in the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, and served her country with pride and honor, eventually becoming a corporal. During the end of her service, she met her future husband, Michael Schwarz, and married in 1955. Before they started a family, the decision was made to move to America for the financial opportunities that were available in this country. They settled in Massachusetts and raised 3 children, Mira, Ronit, and me. As a Holocaust survivor with an abnormal childhood and lack of opportunities, witnessing the development of her own children and eventually grandchildren was a great blessing. To simply be part of birthdays, graduations, and happy occasions gives my mother great joy. Bertha Teitelbaum Schwarz lived her life spread out over 3 continents. Her story is one of inspiration and perseverance. She has dedicated her life to sharing her story and a call to future generations to never forget the history message of the Holocaust.
I decided to go and talk to children in schools here in Baltimore after I moved from Boston to Baltimore. I've been doing that for the last 10 years, and the letters I asked to write me letters, and I have all those letters that I cherished, and I think these letters are very important, and I wish I would meet those children that have grown up and remember what I told them.
And in the end, as my mother has shared with me, we, the generation that suffered and lost our families, our homes and grandparents and parents, are the generation that sacrificed, participated, and witnessed the dream of having our homeland for the Jewish people, Israel. My mother was a child during the Holocaust. These children were persecuted during the Nazi era in ghettos, in concentration camps, in hiding, on the run, or were forced to leave Nazi-occupied Europe. My sisters and I are part of the next generation, descendants of survivors of the Holocaust. Our objectives are to keep alive the memory of the 6 million Jews, including the 1.5 million children murdered during the Holocaust, and to pass on the lessons and legacies to future generations. It is our responsibility to put a spotlight on the stories of survivors as they diminish in number but grow in strength. We will never forget.